You lived an entire, action-packed life before you even turned 3. I mean, you were born, you opened your eyes to a literally brand new world, and you heard your mom's voice for the very first time. And yet, you remember absolutely zero of it, right? In today's Explainer, we're diving into exactly why that is.
Because think about it, during those first few years, you knocked out some massive, monumental life milestones. You felt rain on your skin, you tasted actual solid food for the very first time. You even figured out how to balance your own body weight just to take those incredibly wobbly first steps. Honestly, those were huge, physically demanding accomplishments.
And it wasn't just the physical stuff either. You looked at the people around you, you started mimicking the sounds they were making, and boom, you said your very first words. Your infant brain was just this absolute sponge, rapidly absorbing the world around it and experiencing these mind-blowing firsts literally every single day.
So, here is the big question. Despite all of that monumental living, why do you remember none of it? Seriously, why is there just a complete and utter black hole where the first few years of your life should be? Not even a single moment stuck around. Well, to figure this out, we actually have to look under the hood at the mechanics of the human brain.
Now, most of us just casually assume that a baby's brain is, too young or maybe too simple to hit the record button. But the reality behind infantile amnesia, which is a term Sigmund Freud actually coined way back in 1905, is so much stranger than that. Because your baby brain wasn't failing to record your life, it was actually recording absolutely everything. The memories were definitely in there, but as we're going to see, something came along and completely destroyed them.
Okay, so how do we know babies actually remember things? Well, check out this brilliant experiment from the 1980s by psychologist Carolyn Roe Collier. She tied a simple ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile hanging above their crib. The babies figured out pretty quickly that kicking made the mobile move, and of course they loved it. But here's the crazy part. When she brought those exact same babies back days later, they remembered. They just started kicking immediately. Even 2-month-olds held onto that memory for a couple of days, and 6-month-olds remembered it for weeks. So, without a doubt, infant brains absolutely can learn, store, and recall information.
So what's the holdup? Well, the first piece of the puzzle is a pretty stark structural contrast. In us adults, a part of the brain called the hippocampus works with the prefrontal cortex to tag, store, and bring back long-term episodic memories. But in infants, that whole system is severely underdeveloped. There is a key region in there called the dentate gyrus. Think of it as the gateway for new memories. And it just isn't fully wired up until you're somewhere between 2 and 4 years old. So your baby brain was perfectly fine at forming short-term memories, but it physically lacked the hardware to move them into long-term storage.
But hey, that structural limitation, that's really only half the story. Jump to 2014, and neuroscientists Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Franklin discovered something that totally flipped our understanding upside down. They were looking at neurogenesis. That's the rapid production of brand new brain cells. In babies, this happens at an insanely fast rate because all those new neurons are frantically wiring up the circuits you're going to use for the rest of your life. It's totally essential growth. But Jocelyn and Franklin had a hunch that this massive growth spurt came with a pretty heavy cost.
When they tested this idea out on mice, the results were just astounding. If they artificially cranked up the speed of neurogenesis in adult mice, those adults actually started forgetting things they'd already learned. And on the flip side, when they slowed down that brain growth in infant mice, those little guys held onto their memories way longer than normal. So this experiment proved a really counterintuitive point. Every single time a new neuron gets integrated into an existing circuit, it physically disrupts and overwrites the connections that were already there. And those were the exact connections holding your earliest memories.
So it turns out your earliest experiences weren't lost because you forgot to hit save. They were lost because your brain kept building new rooms and, in the process, literally tearing down the old walls. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold on to those memories. It was just way too busy growing. It was literally bulldozing the physical architecture of your past to pour the foundation for your future mind.
Okay, let's peel back another layer here. This one comes from developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage back in the late 90s. They pointed out that to form an autobiographical memory, the kind where you replay an experience in your head like a movie and you're the main character, you need something we all totally take for granted. You need a sense of self. You have to have an internal narrator. It's this fundamental understanding that you actually exist as a distinct individual, completely separate from everything around you, and that things are happening to you.
There's actually a classic developmental test that pinpoints the exact moment a baby figures this out. You basically just dab a little spot of rouge on a baby's nose and sit them in front of a mirror. Now, before they hit about 18 months old, the baby usually reaches out for the mirror. They treat that reflection like it's just some other random kid.
But right around that 18-month mark, something clicks. They reach for their own face. They finally recognize that the person in the mirror is them. And what's absolutely wild is that this 18-month milestone perfectly lines up with the earliest possible age we can even start forming those autobiographical memories.
Now, I don't know about you, but this raises a profoundly uncomfortable yet super fascinating question for me. If there's no narrator in your head yet, packaging up your experiences into a neat little story, and the physical brain that held all your earliest moments literally rewired itself beyond recognition, is the baby in your old family photos actually you? Or is it someone else entirely? Someone who just happened to live in your exact body, but whose mind was completely disassembled and rebuilt, neuron by neuron, into the person you are today. Kind of a trip, right?
Well, the final missing piece of this whole puzzle, according to developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson, is language. Before you could speak, your memories were just these raw, unfiltered sensory impressions. Just sounds, textures, emotions, a flash of light. Nelson beautifully described this as water with no container. The experiences existed purely in the moment, and then they just washed away. But the second you start speaking and having little conversations with adults about things that happened in the past, language provides a structural framework. It basically gives your memory a skeleton to attach to, which is what allows those experiences to finally survive long-term.
And we actually have the data to back this up. Psychologist Chi Wong at Cornell proved this isn't just some abstract theory. The culture you grow up in literally shapes how far back your memory tape goes. For example, in Western cultures, where parents are constantly narrating their kids' experiences, earliest memories generally kick in around age 3.5. But take a look at the Maori people of New Zealand. They have this incredibly rich oral tradition that puts a huge emphasis on personal history and storytelling, and because of that, their average first memories reach all the way back to age 2.5. Meanwhile, in certain East Asian cultures where early storytelling focuses a bit less on the individual, memories tend to start closer to age 4. So language and narrative literally shape the timeline of your own mind.
So to bring it all together, every single human being who has ever lived went through this exact same perfect storm of forgetting. Your earliest years weren't wiped out by just one little glitch. It was literally everything happening all at once. Your hippocampus just wasn't fully hooked up yet. A massive flood of new neurons came in and literally bulldozed your existing memory circuits. You had zero concept of self to anchor your experiences, and you totally lacked the language to build a surviving structure for them. Ultimately, your brain wasn't being too simple or failing you. It was actually busy doing something infinitely more important than just remembering. It was becoming you. Becoming the complex person you are today required, quite literally, destroying the cognitive architecture of the tiny person who came before. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought about just how incredibly powerful your own mind is. If your brain had to completely disassemble and overwrite the baby you once were just to build the foundation of who you are today, how is your brain quietly rewriting you right now? Just something to think about the next time you try to recall a really old memory.